Hello, welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today we have Jonathan Kelley finally on the podcast. I think I reached out to you a couple of years ago, actually, and then we met each other in October of, was it 2024?
Yeah, I think so. This was Beijing, I think.
Yeah, so I've been trying my best to get as many of the UI folks on the show because, for most apps, obviously the UI is super important. And with Rust, I mean, it's not like, say, JavaScript, etc., where it's like, you have to make something with, HTML, CSS, and so forth. This is really something that's more native. And it relates, the way it works is pretty close to Flutter, which is what I'm used to. And you definitely talk about Dioxus in terms of Flutter. And I think also relate some other UI projects in there too when you're explaining it. But yeah, I mean, let's just kind of come back to you. Maybe I'll let you go ahead and say some more about yourself in case there's something else I missed.
Yeah, so I'm the creator of Dioxus. Some people don't know that Dioxus is actually a company. It was a just side project for the longest time, but then I spent 6, 7, 8 months in industry and realized I preferred working on my own stuff and shopped around for some, corporate sponsorships and then eventually some funding. And yeah, Dioxus is a full-blown company. We don't have a product yet. Dioxus itself, I guess, is the product, but I get to work on it full time, and yeah.
Why did you even get started with Dioxus? So we were talking before the show. I believe you said you're working at Cloudflare, and you said it wasn't for you, and I can understand that. How did Dioxus come onto your radar? Was this something you were just playing around with one day, or you had an idea, or what happened?
Yeah, so I was working at a company that put heads-up displays on tower cranes, which is a very cool product to have as a startup. Unfortunately, that startup doesn't exist anymore, so I guess it wasn't a good enough product. But it was just an internship, and they were writing some software to, do computer vision and video streaming on like construction sites. So I got to climb the tower cranes and install hardware. And the software when I showed up was written in Python, but all the fancy features they wanted required like real-time video computation of the streamed feeds. And they couldn't really do that in Python. It wasn't fast enough. And kind of your only alternative at that point is turn to something like C or C++. We were using the GStreamer crate and GStreamer ecosystem. I guess it wasn't a crate. It was it's like the Python bindings. And there wasn't a penchant on the team to write any of that in C or C++. And the only language on the list was Rust. And this was like 2018. So this was 6, 7 years ago. So we were pretty early adopters of Rust. But at the time, I don't know if anyone remembers, there weren't very many good Rust UI libraries. So I didn't get to ship any of the Dioxus stuff for that internship, but I had this idea that, we are doing all this video processing now in Rust. We have all these GStreamer bindings. The only option was like GTK, basically, like the Rust GTK bindings. And they weren't that great at the time. I'm sure they're better. I haven't played with them since. But I always had this idea in the back of my head, like, what if we built like a good GUI framework in Rust that is HTML and CSS based? You write it once for the web, and then everything you use on the web, you can use everywhere else. You can build native mobile apps. You can build native desktop apps. We deployed on a Jetson Nano, so I still haven't done that yet for Dioxus. We don't have like remote embedded in Linux hot patching, but that's a goal. But yeah, I sat on the idea for the longest time. And then when COVID hit, I needed a COVID project. And it ended up being this Dioxus thing that had been on the back of my mind for the longest time. Kept me busy and ended up launching it right before graduating college. Honestly, trying to get a better job. I heard if you had a good open source project, people would be more inclined to hire you. And yeah, it worked. So I launched Dioxus. Actually had really good reception out of the gate, and then I got a good job at Cloudflare. So, it was a project of curiosity and a project of necessity.
There's a lot in here, right? And there's a lot to this framework. I mean, how did you even get started with trying to understand how all these things work? Because you're supporting, excuse me, let me see if there's actually a count. Like, I see you say DX serve, web, desktop, Android, iOS server. So one, two, three, four, five. That's five right there, right? But then for desktop, that also includes Linux, I believe, Windows, Mac. So what do you have, like
Mhm.
8, 10 different platforms in here? I mean, that's a lot of work for somebody who, I mean, what I heard so far is 2 jobs that you mentioned in programming, at least. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. I mean, how do you even get started with all this kind of work?
Yeah, it's still a challenge today, trying to support all these platforms. It really is. You fix one thing, you break another. We're probably going to be building bespoke tooling to make it easier to support this. You know, Flutter has the approach where they render everything. Every pixel's pushed, so their tests actually involve, like checking every single pixel, and like if it changed, then it's a failure, unless it's a change that they wanted. So I think a good testing system is required for this, but we're kind of not at Flutter scale, nor we have Flutter resources. But you build it once, you build this core implementation, and you have to build it with the idea that you whatever you build is scalable to this cross-platform world. And there's more and more devices and more and more places that people want to deploy to these days. So, we went with this HTML and CSS foundation because at least on the web, you get HTML and CSS for free. That can't be said about Flutter because it doesn't render with HTML and CSS. It renders with its own rendering engine, which makes it harder for them to target the web than it does for us. But conversely, it makes it harder for us to target everywhere else than it is for Flutter.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get a chance to dig into kind of how it all works, but do you mind to kind of start to talk about it? Because it sounds like you're just rendering HTML, CSS, and somehow that gets translated into a native component. Is that right?
Uh, yeah. So the dialect or the primary dialect is HTML and CSS. We provide this RSX macro, which is basically JSX if you're familiar with React. Our initial version of Dioxus was like almost a one-to-one version of React. Like I had my hands and my head in the React internals. I was learning about React Fiber. I was trying to implement everything. A goal was React runtime compatibility, meaning you could drop a Dioxus component in, and it would run alongside the React render tree. It doesn't work anymore today. React has changed, and so has Dioxus. um, but you have this virtual DOM diffing engine. Uh, I think the world has moved on to signals like within the state management tree, but we still use the virtual DOM because it gives us this cross-platform ability that is actually quite hard to replicate. Being able to drive all your elements from JSX-like syntax and then basically hand it off to the framework and let the framework figure out the best way to manage elements is actually a really good strategy. You get all sorts of arena allocators and bump allocators and stuff that can back it in the background and make it much faster than if you drove it directly with signals. And then as far as like rendering goes, on the web, we render HTML and CSS. Users typically want like native elements, like basic. When I say native, I say native to the platform. So they want whatever the platform provides them. And then on desktop and desktop and mobile, we originally bootstrapped everything with a web view. So that basically involves spinning up just like a tiny version of the browser. It's still technically sharing the resources of the browser, so you get all of the browser functionality, but a lot of features are disabled or just don't work properly. You basically just get the rendering engine of the browser, and then you embed that into the application's native, like window container, and that lets you put in any sort of native widget you want. So you can put in like an NS text box or an NS view or like the Android version of those things. And from there, you can build out actually complete native desktop and mobile support. The WebView renderer has been the biggest thing for the longest time, but now in Dioxus 0.7, which is coming up soon, you can jump into WGPU to render everything. So we're rendering HTML and CSS manually, which is quite hard. It's quite challenging, but it unlocks even more flexibility than the original like WebView Bootstrap version.
But HTML, CSS, I mean, CSS is not simple. And also with HTML, I mean, the difference between a div and a span for some people is quite, it takes some understanding to understand the two, right? So is this really like you think this is the correct way to forward for building UIs, is to really stick around the kind of web fundamentals?
Yeah, I mean it's a trade-off. Flutter's in an interesting spot, I would say, because their layout is completely bespoke and their styling is completely bespoke. If you learn Flutter primitives, I wouldn't really say you're particularly equipped to go build an iOS native app unless you've also invested time to learn iOS native. But our goal was there's a huge amount of people who have built web apps. So like React is eating the world, Solid.js, Svelte, and honestly, even like the classic world, you have like Ruby on Rails and like that original like the Django world. So a lot of people know the web, and I really only want to fit one UI toolkit in my head at any given moment in time. So the idea is you start with something everybody knows, and then you give people the ability to build native mobile, native desktop apps out of that. You only have to maintain one syntax, and then there's a spec. So, if you want to do anything special or fancy or custom, there's an HTML spec out there. There's not really a Swift UI spec. Apple's Swift UI is the only implementation of Swift UI that I'm aware of. So we would have to design around Apple's moving target. Whereas with HTML and CSS, it really does seem like it has eaten the world. I think the fact that Electron has so many downsides and yet is still so popular is an indicator that people actually really don't care. They just want something that they can ship quickly. And, the hardware kind of supports it. Hardware's pretty quick these days. So the whole idea with Dioxus is, like meet people where they are. Basically take a look at what people want and what they're building with today and try to meet them where they are rather than push them into something new. I worry that if we tried something entirely new in like the native toolkit space, no one would use it because it's just too much to learn. Yeah.
But even nowadays, I mean, before it was much worse, but nowadays, even if like web-based stuff, right, browsers can render things differently. Like I remember recently my business partner and I were building a product together, and all of a sudden I'm using Chrome like a normal person, but he's using Firefox, and we sometimes actually have some issues with that even nowadays, which is quite interesting. And there's still like some features of CSS and HTML which are supported in some browsers and some not. So what about this kind of problem that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I might be the only person in the developer world that uses Safari as their daily driver. And we've been working on a component library recently, and there was this like ridiculous bug. You clicked like the date on our calendar widget, and every widget on the page grew in size by like 1 pixel. So it's like every time you click on the page, everything just grows and grows and grows. But this bug does not exist in Chrome or Firefox, exclusively Safari. So, even just building like a widget library, you have to work around these like kind of crazy rendering issues. No, but that's like a trade-off, right? I think a lot of people approach that or they use that as a reason why the web doesn't work. Everyone kind of optimizes for one or the other. You have two options when you deploy web views. You can use the systems web view, which will typically have this issue, or you can use like Chromium Embedded Framework, which I wouldn't really say is it's better than Electron in some ways, but it is kind of still just like shipping a browser to render a mail app. Our new WGPU renderer for Dioxus is basically our own implementation. So we're now a fourth version of a browser. You have Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and now you have Blitz that you have to work around. But Blitz just kind of like yanks the CSS engine out of Firefox. basically the way it resolves style sheets, we resolve in the same way. It just might have bugs with painting that we don't have the same bugs with painting. So we'll have our own issues. It'll have its own issues. But, you know, people are already building component libraries and having to work around the browser's quirks. We hope that by doing that, they're using a version of CSS that is like more portable and just works in Blitz. And for what it matters, like the component library we built actually works quite well in Blitz. Like it renders quite well, and Blitz is not done, so it's great. Yeah, it's like a moving target, but at least it's a consistent-ish moving target. It doesn't get deprecated next year.
Do you have any way to render stuff where it's like, okay, I want you to render like a native button, and then you have the typical like material design button in Android, and in iOS, if you render the same app, you're gonna get like Cupertino style, or it's just always gonna be whatever style that you style it.
Yeah, so I mean, this was a big reason of moving away from like the WebView bootstrap world to the new world of WGPU and custom textures. Uh, WebViews are very powerful, but they don't let you composite buttons into the scene very easily. There are ways, but generally, if you're going to do native widgets, they sit on top of the content with WebViews. With the WGPU renderer, Blitz, you can actually composite system widgets into the scene, which is probably like the most powerful thing any of our projects have done. Like you can get complete native widgets composited in around HTML and CSS that you're also rendering yourself, and you can render custom elements. Our long-term goal is to switch to more of a React Native feel, like start in Flutter and go to React Native. But you kind of want to stick with this like unified like layout and styling engine, this HTML and CSS at the top, and whatever the button is just an abstraction that you don't care about too much. But going with it, like a Cupertino button gives you all of the accessibility, it gives you all the haptics, basically everything that Apple gives you for free. We don't have to invent ourselves. So it, again, like most things, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, that's another question I had in my mind, is the accessibility, right? Because I remember, so when we went to GoSim, like we actually had the luxury of having quite a few people and quite a few UI people, right? We had one guy from Flutter, which didn't make sense because it's basically a Rust camp for the most part. We had a couple people from React Native, or at least React Native like developers. I'm not sure if there's anybody working on the React Native SDK over there. But we had, I think it's Rick from MakePad. And what I thought was really interesting is listening to Kevin from the Flutter team when he was talking about accessibility. And that's something that people just don't talk about because they, like when most of people, like we don't really have, most people don't have accessibility issues like maybe color blindness or so forth, or at least so bad that it's a problem to use the phone by itself, right? And, like having that support is really, really, really important. And Flutter obviously had to build all that stuff by hand because they have their own renderer. I'm guessing you also had to do this too, or you definitely had to figure out some kind of solution for this, because otherwise it's kind of useless for a good portion of people out there. I mean, of course, not everybody, but some key people out there, right? To actually build an app and have it used by like anybody, you still need to have accessibility for it.
Yeah. I mean, there was a survey of the Rust GUI ecosystem, round 2. I guess round 1 happened a couple years ago. But round 2, they tested the basics. They tested, can you spawn a window? Is it easy to write text? And then like the third thing they tested was, can my system reader actually read what's on the page, and does it do it properly? Honestly, like the simplest accessibility test in the world. And pretty much everyone in the Rust ecosystem failed. I think maybe 2 or 3 frameworks kind of passed, but then Dioxus, I'm going to toot my own horn for a second, it passed completely. And honestly, is because we took the HTML and CSS path, which, you can look at it however you want, but browsers have really good accessibility and web views have really good accessibility by default. And they're semantic, and an H1 is a header, and your system reader actually knows how to understand all this content. Again, instead of inventing the wheel, you go with something that exists. Very smart people have invested lots of time in making these platforms accessible for all of us. And, it's extremely important that whatever you ship is like accessible out of the box. There's like aspects of accessibility people just kind of overlook, I would say. Even the basics, like, can you paste a file into this text box? That is like a semantic question that is not answerable from just like putting an input down. You really do need to plumb everything about the metadata and the intent and the context, and the work you go into making something accessible also makes interfaces more usable. They talk about this where like you make something 10% more accessible makes it like 50% more usable to everybody else. So like these little things we do to make our apps and our tools easier for the people who have it hardest to use, make it easier for everyone to use. And when you go into this world of WGPU rendering, you now have the responsibility to do this yourself. Fortunately, there's a library in Rust called AccessKit that is pushing the frontier here. I think it's Matt Campbell and Arnold are pushing. I met up with them at the RustNL this year, and there's really good synergy between AccessKit and a lot of the GUI projects in the Rust ecosystem right now. So Blitz and Dioxus Native have decent accessibility at the box. It's not great. We build the accessibility tree. We try to do all the ARIA translation, like the stuff that powers HTML's accessibility. We try to plumb that into AccessKit. It's not done, but you want your system, you want your app frameworks and the apps that people build to be visible to like the operating system, and tools like AccessKit make that possible, and honestly just easier for all of us to use.
I did have somebody on like my other podcast talking about this, and it's quite interesting how the stuff, how important the stuff kind of works. I mean, what else is something too? I'm not sure if it relates to accessibility or not, but since we're talking about HTML CSS, I mean, there's always like Flexbox is one thing that comes to mind, right? They have like flex start, flex end. It's not like flex top, flex bottom, flex left, flex right, because it's about like left to right languages, basically, right?
Yeah,
And there's
yeah.
this kind of like thing. I don't know if does it actually relate to accessibility or not? How like left to right languages work?
Well, left to right languages and right to left languages honestly make everything very challenging. Like, it's one of those things where you wrote all your code once and then you go look at the spec and you kind of need to go write it again. Um, yeah, Flex is interesting. Flex also is just poorly named in most situations. I still don't understand or remember all the Flex terms. I kind of always have to open like Flexbox Froggy, which is like this game that teaches you Flexbox. I have to open that just to remember what's the direction of this flex and what's the align here. Yeah, it's it's funny. It's kind of challenging.
Yeah, I was doing the same for a while too, but then I'm mostly using Tailwind when I'm doing pages. So I look it up and then I just try something if it's backwards and obviously it's the other way or whatever. Just kind of figure out by saving and seeing how it looks.
Yeah. I mean, so my hot reloading is really important. You can figure out what direction your
Sorry,
flex
I
aligns.
actually want to talk a little bit about the hot reloading part because that's super, super important. And you're doing things a bit differently. Like so the one thing that was attractive to me was, oh wow, what is the name of, is it 60 FPS that made their UI?
Slint, I believe.
Yeah, Slint. That's right, Slint. I think
Yeah.
I think maybe actually they changed the company name also to Slint too, if I remember correctly. But yeah, anyways, their major product is Slint. Uh, but they have really awesome like I mean obviously UI thing, obviously different style than Dioxus, but what they do have to make their hot reloading work is they have like a separate templating language. I'm not sure what you'd call that. I guess it'd be a template language. But you're doing things a little bit differently, right? To make yours work. Can you start to explain a little bit about how your hot reloading works and why you chose to go that route?
Yeah, so we have two hot reloading engines as of Dioxus 0.7. So the first one we have had for a while is just like hot reloading of the RSX macro. So just like React, we have a bespoke DSL for defining elements. The React JSX is kind of like HTML in JavaScript, whereas the Dioxus RSX, it's like, it almost looks like structs, like if you like nested a bunch of structs together. It's not too different from Swift UI or Kotlin multi-platform or Compose or something like those templating languages. For the longest time, our hot reloading engine only supported hot reloading of elements within that context. So if you added a div or you modified some Tailwind or you added an ID, add some styles, we hot reload just the macro contents. And then we added asset support, so you could edit style sheets and then you'd get hot reloads on the page. But with Dioxus 0.7, we really wanted to just like completely open up the envelope of what could be hot reloaded. We had put a lot of effort into making stuff that seemed like Rust code, but was actually not necessarily Rust code, like literals, hot reloadable. Like you type the number 2, we can actually interpret that at compile time and at runtime. But that wasn't enough. Like we wanted to hot reload pretty much everything in the app. We want to be able to rewind to the main component and rebuild all the way down. So we've been building this engine called Subsecond, which allows hot patching of Rust code. So you have to use our dxserve tool. We own the entire compilation process, but we're actually inspecting like the object files that the Rust compiler generates, and then we do the linking. So normally the Rust compiler would hand your files off to a linker and build a binary and then pass that forward. We actually do all the linking. We inspect all the object files. We do this on every platform. It has support for Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, Android, WebAssembly. It's like the whole 9 yards. But when you own the linker, you can actually incrementally bring in new chunks of the program that have changed into the running program. And you can hot patch Rust code while it's running. So the new engine is extremely fast. Like on my laptop, it's like 150 milliseconds for a hot patch for like a fresh app, which, it's not just us that benefits from it. Like even Bevy has taken Subsecond, put it into their tree. They have built a hot patching feature for Bevy around it, and it took them, I think, start to finish like 2 weeks, a week to do it. So I'm very excited for this hot patching engine. It's probably one of the most interesting things we've ever worked on in Dioxus land.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm kind of curious. Why have you talked to other UI libraries and see if they're interested in using it? I mean, obviously Bevy, got a hold of it and I think it's useful.
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge interest. Iced, for example, I believe Hector is interested in using it. Jared Moulton at Floem, I think, is also. I saw a demo of it working in the Floem stuff. I mean, we got it working with eGUI. Like pretty much like everyone that's building native apps I'm aware of, or I don't know if everyone, but a lot of people have already like integrated the Subsecond alpha into their stuff and have built some hot patching around it.
Well, I mean, what about I think you mentioned the project name, but now it's coming to my mind. So Rick has MakePad, yeah, Rick with MakePad. I know he spent some time with me and he showed me his stuff, and it compiles really, really fast. I mean, you don't even really need hot code reload if it compiles that fast, right?
Yeah. I kind of think this is something where we don't necessarily agree with. Like, I think it's very important that the core compiles very quickly, but the reality is once people start to add libraries like Surdy and Sin and Tokyo and I don't know, the stuff people like to add to apps, you really have no control over their compile times. I think he was saying this about the Matrix client that they've been working on. Is like, well, the second they add the Matrix SDK, the compile times go from 1 second to like a minute. You get into like a part in your UI where you have some state that you've accumulated, like a Discord app, you've loaded state from the file system, or like a mail app or something, you don't really want to lose the state. So, hot patching, hot reloading, they give you this ability to like update just little pieces of the app while it's running, and you don't lose all that state. You don't have to re-navigate to it. So it is not just compile times. It is like honestly just the ergonomics of building an app.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, because sometimes you need the data there in order to see what is it you're changing for. So that definitely makes sense. So the latest stable release is 061, but you're just releasing 070, like I think you said today, Alpha 0. Is that right?
So the Alpha 1 is already out. We've had 2 alpha releases. You can go use all of our stuff, and it's full alpha glory today. I think today is like Friday, June 20th. We were supposed to get our release out this Monday, Monday that passed, but I went into the woods and meditated for like a week and a half. So it kind of pushed out our release date a little bit. I hope by the time this comes out, Dioxus 0.7 is out. It might be a day or two until the full thing is out, but the alpha is out, so you can still use all these features I've been talking about, just not in a fully stable version yet.
I mean, how not stable are we talking? Like, can I start to build a production app with it? Is it safe, or is it just like there may be some sudden small last minute API changes or some last minute bugs you still have to iron out? Or what kind of stability are we looking at for an alpha release for you?
The way releasing these big projects works, you like end up building all these features, and at a certain point, whatever you have merged into main, like your primary branch in Git, that is no longer compatible with your last version. So you basically have held all your breaking changes until a certain day, and then you're like, okay, fine, we'll start breaking it. And then kind of like the timer is on, the countdown is on to merge all your breaking changes and then stabilize it as fast as possible. And I think we did a good job with that on this release. We held 0.6 kind of into the last moment and then started merging everything in. Where it is right now, like the alpha that's out is like Alpha 1, I think is quite stable. I mean, we're still fixing bugs, but honestly, we've just got like feedback from people about certain little tweaks that need to be made or some edge cases that don't work too well. But Alpha 1, I've test driven it. It's quite great. It does all the stuff. It's quite stable. But, if you're deciding, should I start building an important app on it, the 0.7 is like coming in like a week, like in its full glory. So hopefully by the time this is out, it's production ready. I think production ready is kind of a funny thing because, for an early adopter, production ready, kind of means like whatever it is today. Whereas like for an enterprise, production ready probably means like a support contract. So most people fit on that spectrum of like, what does production ready mean to them? I think you can build like production ready apps with Dioxus, and people already are. So, there's support out there for it.
But still, I mean, you're still at 0.7, right? Are you ever going to go to a 1.0 at some point? I mean, what does 1.0 mean to you, right? So usually people say 1.0 is production ready, means anybody could build with it. You can have faith in it, etc. That's kind of, I'm not trying to say that's the actual like written in stone meaning of it, but that's what people tend to take. What this is 1.0, totally ready to go. You can build stuff in it. It's pretty rock solid. You can put your faith into it. But this is still 0.70, right? Even if it's not stable yet. But let's just say it's stable enough. Mm-hmm. So what does 1.0 look like to you?
Yeah. There's a lot of churn in libraries, and I imagine being on a non 1.0 sends a message that you're going to break APIs. We had a big breaking release in 0.5 to improve the ergonomics of our state management. Basically, previously you had to call .clone in some places to get hooks into async contexts. We hated that. So we had a big breaking release that made them all copy. You didn't need to call clone anymore, but that broke like pretty much every app that had been written. But since then, we have hated shipping breaking changes because we have to go update our stuff. Like we feel the pain of breaking changes. So honestly, it's very unlikely that state management will see massive breaking changes or elements or hooks or like any of the vast majority of stuff you touch as like as someone building an app. So I don't want to say that's 1.0 yet, but if we could put like Dioxus core on a 1.0, like the core stuff you run into, we would. It's just, managing versions, and now you have to tell people that, okay, Dioxus 0.7 is only compatible with Dioxus 1, and Dioxus 0.8 is compatible with Dioxus 2, that kind of thing is like challenging to deal with. But, what does a Dioxus 1.0 look like? We have this idea that we want to ship like a complete SDK for Rust. So there's Dioxus SDK, which lets people do things like storage or camera or biometrics, like those sorts of things. We want that for like the whole Rust ecosystem. There's like the standard library that kind of just like drops you. We want to build an SDK which has everything in it. I think we want to get that done, or at least like the first version of that done, and then we can mark Dioxus as 1.0. That way people are guaranteed that, the camera APIs work today. Like that's a sort of a sign that all the features we wanted in Dioxus are here, and we're just going to continue to like improve them, make them faster, better. But we're willing to live with the burden of maintaining that. So we're not there yet. I think that's a Dioxus 0.8 release cycle, getting all these native functions and SDK features out. And then maybe after that, we'll look into 1.0ing Dioxus. Yeah, I hate I hate modifying our like we actually have quite a bit of Dioxus code at this point. So any like breaking change we make, we feel pretty deeply. So we hate making breaking changes.
Well, another question I have is what's the boundaries of Dioxus? The reason I ask is if you kind of go back to Flutter's whole thing, right? The way I see Flutter is that they're mostly focusing on, the UI, but obviously they stretch a bit into some other parts, but like, let's say there's something like super native to, say, iOS with like maybe the wallet, etc., or some special feature that's in the SDK for iOS, right? That's iOS specific only. They don't, you can't really write Dart to hit that kind of stuff. You actually have to reach into the native SDK. So like, is Dioxus in the same boat where they're kind of like covering what Flutter can cover, or is it that they're going to just stop, you just stop basically at whatever you can do in Rust with whatever, like can you actually reach into the native SDK in case you actually need something that's native to a specific platform?
Yeah. I mean, my goal is to never have to write Swift or Kotlin, which are honestly they're actually not too bad. They're quite good languages. I think Swift has too many keywords, and Kotlin is sort of shackled by its ecosystem, like the JVM. But honestly, it's like a productivity thing. If I only have to remember how to write one language at any moment in time, I'd probably be really good at that one language. The second I have to do multiple languages, I'll probably be pretty bad at all of them. And I hate it when SDKs drop you. Like you finally get to a point in your app development cycle, and then it's like, I need to do something, and there's no instructions. The only like docs they give you is like, go look at this other language. And if you think about it, like the rabbit hole that you're already in, you're very deep in it, and they're telling you to go jump into a new rabbit hole. Yeah, it's not fun. So our long-term goal is, things like, I think live activities are like a uniquely bespoke iOS thing. I want to write live activities in Rust, and I want to hot patch them in, and I want to style them in the way that I know how to style them. I don't see a world where we kind of say no to building bespoke abstractions over platform APIs. We have a full stack aspect of Dioxus as well, so you can serve both a client and a server at the same time, which is really good for frameworks that support like RPC in them, which Dioxus has. We have these server functions. We share that crate with another big Rust web framework, and the server functions that you call like backend code from your front end, and like that's a uniquely powerful thing. It kind of sets this like boundary of what Dioxus does to, maybe we do full stack now. So I think in the future we're gonna go really hard into building stuff on top of Axum, or maybe a competitor to Axum that lets you do like full stack Rust web, but with all of the goodies that Dioxus has, and WebSockets and templates and and auth and database and all these cool features. And I'm pretty sure that's a explicit non-goal in Flutter land. um, so I think Final Dioxus would be pretty big in terms of what it stretches out to.
But what if you need to reach into the native SDK? Do you provide a way to drop down into that?
Yes and no. So there's like the JNI crate in Rust. There's the Objective-C crate in Rust. There's a Swift bridge crate in Rust. Those are good enough for now. They have been good enough. But with this big native API push, we kind of want something better. So keep an eye out. We'll probably be introducing like a better build system and a better binding system for all of these things. Fortunately with like Swift, you can kind of just like include a symbol from the Swift SDK. You just like extern C and then the name of the symbol from the framework. And it kind of just does work. But they're like Swift types at the boundary. So you need like a Swift bridge to communicate with it. But like for example, I think iOS has like augmented reality features. We're not going to implement that. We probably want the platform to implement that. So in that instance, yeah, you want to dip down into the system. And, fortunately, there's a way of doing it. I think like React Native is a little bit more challenging. There's no way of writing direct platform framework connections from JavaScript. You need to go use some like intermediate jump library that lets you compile native modules into JavaScript and bindings and all this. Whereas like in Rust, if you run into an issue that the SDK can only solve, like the native SDK, you can just sit there and write the FFI in line next to your component. And that's honestly what we do in a lot of cases.
What if you had like an existing app and you wanted to like embed your app into that app, or even the other way around, if you want to embed like a React Native app into your own app? Is that actually possible? That's usually how people can start to bring in new frameworks or whatever. I'll let you finish the answer you were starting with.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wish the story there was better. Honestly, it'd be better for adoption, if you could just add a Dioxus view to your React Native app. And that was the original goal, was like runtime compatible with React. No longer, but it is possible, but you are kind of, you're on your own. The tooling is not really intended to support that at the moment. You can do it with the web much easier than you can do with like the iOS or Android, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's definitely not easy to do, so I can totally understand. Yeah, I don't think I have any more questions, right? We covered quite a few pieces of the of what Dioxus is and the latest release. The only other question I had is, I think you mentioned something about you and other UI people met in Rust and and had some discussions. Is there anything like coming out of that? Is there going to be like a UI working group where everybody's going to be participating and trying to find some way to have? That's something actually we really need more, I think, in Rust, is like some commonalities. Like I don't know what it's called in Rust. Sorry, there's like Rack for Ruby. It's like a common interface that you can easily plug in apps. Is there going to be something similar with the UI in Rust?
Yeah, that's a good question. The UI group in Rust is a funny group of people. I feel like it's probably one of the most opinionated group of people in the Rust world. Or maybe everybody is, and it's just the group I'm privy to. You have all sorts of different strategies. I mean, you have Slint, you have MakePad, you have like eGUI. So I think last RustNL, not this one, but the previous one, I got to meet the kind of just like everyone who had a big project. So like I think it's Emil from the eGUI team. We have Rega, MakePad. One of the interesting ones, I think, is Velo, like the Rafe, sort of the evolution of Druid. Xylem, I think, is the name of that toolkit. There is an air of collaboration among some of the frameworks. I wouldn't say everybody wants to collaborate. Some people have different goals or things on their plate. But unfortunately, there's a couple of us that are very interested in sort of like hitting the frontier of Rust and UI and then building it together. So our Blitz project actually uses the Velo renderer by Rafe, or I guess it's the line bender team. And it's very symbiotic in my opinion. I mean, they have their own UI framework that I guess competes with Dioxus, but Rafe is very interested in frontier of rendering tech, and we're very interested in having a good renderer. So we've brought the state layer and the layout layer and the styling layer, and then they bring the rendering layer, and then we're able to build something like Blitz. And there's the idea that we're also get a system compositor crate in Rust. Someone also on that team is interested in building that, and that would let us do things like the native iOS or Android like video rendering widget, like the picture-in-picture thing. It's hardware accelerated, right? There's like a chip running in the background that does that, and makes that fast. That in Rust doesn't exist, unfortunately. So, we're going to go work on that with them, and we're going to try to help improve AccessKit. So there's a number of libraries that the ecosystem is collaborating on. We have something called Taffy, which is like a layout, like it's Flexbox implemented in Rust. That is used by us and Velo and Bevy and a number of other people. So, these like foundational crates, I think people have been excited to collaborate on. Kind of the stuff, I guess the high level users of these frameworks don't really see, but for us, like rendering text to the screen might be one of the hardest things we do. And in that instance, it's good to get the whole community together and try to improve the fundamental crates that do it.
Oh yeah, I forgot about how difficult it is. I'm so used to just writing the minimal amount of stuff, and it just kind of comes up. It is quite complicated to draw anything on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah, text might be the worst, I will say, because you do it all left to right. You have to do it right to left and top to bottom and bottom to top, and Mac renders their characters a little bit thinner than the rest of the platforms, and they scale their text by 4 and then render it down by 2, and yeah, it's there's a million details you have to get right, and if you don't, it looks fuzzy and grainy, and people won't use it.
Actually, what just came to mind, I was just thinking about the Z editor people. I know that they built their editor, and they really focused a lot on speed and these kind of things. Have you had a discussion with them about rendering? And I mean, there must be quite a lot of knowledge, at least about the Mac platform from them.
Yeah. So, I mean, fun fact, they use Taffy, which is our layout library. So Taffy lives in Dioxus, and it lives in Bevy, and it also lives in Zed. So small piece of us is in Zed. But they took the smart decision and just used the system text rendering engine. So on Mac, I believe it's Core Text. On Windows, it might be FreeType. There are names for these things. But that's the right way to do it. Just let the system handle it, because then you are never out of sync with the system. It just requires building these bespoke APIs. But that's how you get like acceptable text on mainstream platforms. But yeah, I mean, they have a lot of lessons. GPUI is a very cool framework. I think our Blitz stuff has finally caught up to them in terms of like what it can do. But I think they had probably one of the most competent like rendering engines. Obviously the most used, right? Zed is such a popular tool right now.
Yeah, and I know that they really focus on it. And I talked to a couple of people who are using it, and they can tell. I mean, if you're in the editor day in day out, and you come from VS Code or whatever, you can probably start to tell the difference. It's really like if you're focusing on your editor, you can probably tell the difference of the rendering and stuff pretty quickly. I haven't played around too much with Zed, but it's something I definitely need to do. I'm just, as a developer, right? If you change something core to your workflow like an editor, it's a big investment, because you got to relearn keys and where everything is and plugins, and you have to, it's just, it takes time. So you really need to. It's a commitment.
Yeah, I'll frequently get like frustrated with VS Code, and I'm like, fine, I'll switch to Zed, and then I do it for a day, and then it's like, oh, my PR like review workflow that I use, Git Kraken or something, it doesn't exist in Zed. It's like, oh, okay, or like I can't get the syntax highlighting just right. My braces aren't the right color. Okay, fine, I'll go back. I haven't stuck yet. Yeah, they haven't got me all the way.
Yeah, I know quite a few people who really bought into it. It's something that, yeah, I should probably force myself to do it for a week and see how it is. But yeah, it's it's one of those things that, you have your opinions on, like you said about, the UI people. You have the same thing about your editing workflow for code. It's really particular.
Yeah, yeah. VS Code
Um,
so far is the least bad one, in my opinion.
yeah.
But I wouldn't say any of them are perfect. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, coming back, I think I've asked everything I had to ask. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to let people know, or anything you wanted to say before we sign off?
Well, we have our 0 to 7 release. Hopefully, it's out by the time this podcast comes out, or if it's not, it should be out soon. Uh, it's very cool. We did the hot patching stuff, so if it caught your interest, just check out the hot patching. Just and you can like install the CLI from like a one-liner now. So you just like curl install dx new dx serve, and then you can feel what like Rust hot patching feels like. Hopefully it's fast on your machine, and hopefully it works. Our Blitz stuff is out, which you can use outside of Dioxus. You can just like build rendering things around it, and then we shipped a bunch of stuff with lms.txt. I think we might be the only Rust people that have like a whole lms.txt pipeline. Our goal with this is eventually, once we have our web framework built in, you could just like put Claude code on a really good prompt. We'll give a really good prompt, and then it can just like print software, like print front ends, print back ends, build all these native apps. So I wish there was more penchant in the Rust ecosystem for these AI tools, but we're gonna do it. They're useful for us, and people like complain to us that Claude doesn't know anything about Dioxus. So hopefully that's fixed with this release. Yeah. There's a lot going on in Dioxus land. I feel like we don't talk about it too much. We don't really advertise it. Our homepage is kind of bland. I have yet to work on improving that, but we've been trying to honestly get it closer to a 1.0 before we're sort of like ready to yap about it too much. So yeah, check it out. Release is coming out.
I mean, so far it seems pretty straightforward. I think I do agree about about the HTML CSS stuff. It's the web is kind of one of the most open platforms out there, and it does have a spec, even if, as we talked about, some browsers, some platforms don't support the spec 100% as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the HTTP itself is like that too. I mean, I had a discussion, I think, with MacArthur about this one. Sorry, from Hyper, and we talked about the spec says this, but it says it should do this, but doesn't mean it does do that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's always this like what ifs, and certain things do some things and not the other, and that's just a big mess.
Yeah, like a bug in Swift UI might not be noticed because it just that's Swift UI. Whereas like a bug in how you render HTML is like you're diverging from the spec, or the spec is underspecified here. I guess that's like a good thing that we even notice it in the first place.
I mean, my biggest problem about the web right now is there's some features I really, really want to use, but they're just not available in all the browsers. Like it may be in like Google Chrome, but now that I work with people who are outside of US who are not now directly with me, I realize that Chrome is not the only browser out there. People still, work with Edge or whatever. Luckily, Edge nowadays is it Edge that's now using Chromium, I think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They've
So
moved.
it's closer, and then luckily there's no more IE6. That's basically dead finally since the last couple of years.
Yeah, Dioxus won't work on IE6, unfortunately. So I'm glad it's dead too. New world.
But I lived in China for a while, like mainland China. So I remember having to deal with IE6 for some time. It's like some banks, they would not let you do anything else but IE6.
Wow. Yeah. No, the world has moved on.
China's moved on, let's say. Because I remember even after IE6 was dead on the countdown death clock, they were still using it for some places. But luckily, they now that I think since Chrome became open source, I think even a lot of other companies have just taken Chrome and just used it, or Firefox, etc. So thank God for open source.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, in China, a lot of the apps actually are like Electron, basically. They ship a Chromium. Uh, for better or for worse. Gives them these like mini apps thing, but yeah, it's there's a lot of opinions on how to do it. It's fun to see open source continue to eat the world.
No, I think China's moving along nowadays. I think I think Rick is working closely with Huawei or FutureWay, or I mean, they work with each other too. Those two different companies. So China's definitely doing some more. They're definitely ahead of where they were many years ago. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, we're hoping to get Open Harmony support soon at some point. Uh,
That's the funny thing. Everybody's talking about Open Harmony. I had my own Rust conference out here, and because it's in Hong Kong, like there was a lot of discussions about people saying like we want to get a Huawei phone with Harmony on it. Like we want to test our app to see if it works okay on it. There's quite a lot of discussions about that. So it's interesting that a lot of people are looking at that. For me, what I see is actually a lot of local developers are porting it themselves and just doing it for themselves and not actually like trying to create a community around it, which I think is a missed opportunity.
mm, yeah, I saw some posts yesterday, something about like open source can't coordinate. So I think you need these like strong personalities to pull the projects together, but then you build the community, the ecosystem around it.
Yeah, there's that, but I think people don't realize that if they just reach out to, like, if somebody from Harmony OS team reached out to you, I think you'd be more than happy to work with them to make it work. But I think they're just not. I think a lot of people just underestimate that we're all like around the same level. So if somebody reached out to you with this kind of request, I think you'd be pretty open to helping them because you do want that support, right? It is a market.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have people that they request Open Harmony support, but it's sort of like a drive-by request. It really is not that hard to add, right? We've had to add all these other platforms. It's kind of just like one more branch to an enum in a bunch of places. So, yeah, if you wanted to do it, I'm sure it's easy to do. It's just I don't have all the knowledge and context about it in my head today. But if someone was excited to do it, they could at least get some guidance from us on even where to begin looking. I think people are either intimidated or they got a lot on their plate. So it is what it is. It kind of puts the burden on us to implement a lot of things. But I would love it if someone reached out, especially for all these features, right? They're usually more useful to someone else than me directly. And it's a good way to get feedback from people, Like if they show up with the feature implemented, you're like, that's what they want.
Okay. Well, again, great having you on finally. It's good to hear more about what's going on with Dioxus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we get closer to a 1.0, it'd be great to have you on to kind of talk about, what what were the final features that made it this a 1.0 release, and how do you feel about it, etc. Then maybe 10 years from now, who knows, right? I feel like a lot of Rust libraries stay in under 1.0 for a long time, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, yeah, like I said, it's just trying to convince people that pre 1.0 does not mean it's not ready. And if anything, it's getting worse. Is that right? Not ready?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's ready to be. You should say it like that.
I hope I've been talking with the team. I hope by the end of this year we're like ready to put a 1.0 on the library. So 2 more releases, maybe this will be a early next year kind of thing. We'll 1.0 it and then kind of just stop breaking it.
Yeah, but if you break it, then that's what a 2.0 releases. If it's going to be a big break, or a 1.1, right?
Well, can you do 1.1? Something Semver. We ran into this.
I think you can. It's not too bad. If you're following semantic, I believe 1.1 is like a small breakage, and then a 2 would be like a huge change.
Okay. All right. Well, that gives us more flexibility than I thought.
I mean, look at Angular. Was it on like 50 or something? Version 50 dot something or something? It's been a wild ride. So this basically the numbers are the limit. There's nothing else stopping you.
Yeah, there are infinities. I think React Native is on like 70 something.
Yeah. They're also quite high.
150 maybe. What is the current version? 80. 80 is the current version. Yeah, that's pretty high. Well, actually 0.80. Okay, so they're not 1.0, I guess.
Still? Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, see, React Native's not 1.0 and people still use it.
Okay, I didn't know that one. Now I know. But again, good to have you on, and hopefully have you again back on in the future.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Alan.